done for us. That was on December the 4th, 1991. As most Nashville entertainers hire their bands at the beginning of each year, we wanted these people to have plenty of time to find new employment. We also invited them to play my New Year's Eve show at double salary. All but one band member took a professional attitude. The disgruntled musician talked to a reporter and a big story followed. It said that I had fired my band 2 weeks before Christmas and suggested that I didn't care about the players or their families. It made no mention of my considerations. The story was a distortion and an embarrassment to me. It was an unfortunate end to a painful, difficult year. I had to wonder at the time if the fallout from the tragedy we had suffered would ever stop. But throughout this sad time, the outpouring from my fans was overwhelming. Please let me tell you how much I appreciated your kindness in helping me to get through it. I love each and every one of you for your love and support, as well as for your financial help to the victims' families. I'm very grateful to members of the country music community, too. And I owe a special expression of gratitude to C.K. Spurlock, Kenny Rogers' international promoter. C.K., who was very close to Michael Thomas, was the one who organized the benefit to provide financial help to the crash victims' families. In May of 1991, I went into the studio to record For My Broken Heart, the album that was my commemoration of the band and Jim. That album means the most to me of all the albums I've ever recorded. It clearly expresses my feelings of hurt and my hope for healing. The final song on the album is called If I'd Only Known, obviously dedicated to my band and Jim. There was so much of my heart in that song that it tore me up to sing it. I performed it once on an AIDS benefit television special, which seemed appropriate, and I sang it on the Oprah Winfrey Show, where some of the audience cried through the whole song. I was caught off guard on that show. Right after I was introduced, the first thing I was hit with was film footage of the crash, while the camera stayed on my face to register my reaction. I was shocked. But now I see that Oprah is a very wise woman. She recognized how, when you're a public figure, folks look to you for leadership. They want to see how you handle a tragedy that might be similar to one they once went through or might go through. But for a while I was too heartbroken to assume the role. Music is so weird sometimes, so therapeutic and healing. In 1992, when I went into the studio to record my new album, It's Your Call, the first song I chose was Lighter Shade of Blue. I had found it just before we left on that fateful trip to San Diego, and it had really moved me. Later it gave me hope in those dark days that my sorrow would eventually subside. When the new album came out, people would ask me if I was over the crash. I could only say, it's just like the song, I've only turned a lighter shade of blue. In the aftermath of the crash, we were touring a lot, but I found myself wishing for something different to do to get my mind off the accident. The answer to my prayer came from Ken Cragen, Kenny Rogers' manager. Kenny was making a 2-part television miniseries, The Gambler 4, The Gambler Returns, and he wanted me to be in it. I knew it would be a lot of fun to work with Kenny, and I've always been a huge fan of his. I got to play a madam back at the turn of the century. It was a western, so I rode horse and wore beautiful full dresses. My next role came in 1993, in the made-for-TV movie Man from Left Field, in which I co-starred with Burt Reynolds. Burt is not only a great actor, but he's also a great director. In one scene where Burt and I were lying in the sand, he had about 3 pages of dialogue to do. If I'd have thought about it, I would have wondered how in the world he could memorize all that. Suddenly I heard a tiny, muffled voice. "Where's that coming from?" I said to myself, but I stayed in character, as you're supposed to do until someone yells cut. Finally I noticed a wire running from inside Bert's shirt to an earpiece. Someone off camera was feeding him his lines. I thought that was clever, and had I known that could be done, I might have asked for the assistance myself. That same spring, I got the part of Ma Tex in the movie North, which had a cast accomplished enough to intimidate any fairly green actor. Bruce Willis, Dan Aykroyd, and Kathy Bates. I learned a lot by watching them work. It was produced and directed by Rob Reiner, who treated me as nicely as I could have ever asked for. And in 1994, I'm releasing my own made-for-TV movie based on my video Is There Life Out There? It's the story of a woman who's made a good life, marriage, children, a home, but she can't help but wonder if she's missing out on something. The video ends with the woman, me, receiving a college diploma and a chance to make her good life better. Nothing I've ever done has touched so many women's hearts. I can't count the number of letters I've gotten from women who said they went back to school after watching the video. I've had a good life myself, and it makes me feel good to give something back, not only through music, but also through social involvement. One way I'm doing it is through the Reba Ranch House. It's connected to the Texoma Medical Center in Denison, Texas, about 60 miles from where I grew up. It's a home away from home for families whose loved ones are hospitalized at the center, so they can be nearby to care and comfort them. It's a project I'm very proud of. Since we first started out, Starstruck Entertainment has been expanding to include 3 music publishing companies, a publicity agency, a concert booking and promotions agency, a construction company, a racing stable, a jet service company, my fan club, an advertising company, and an artist management company that includes 4 managers and their assistants. We all have experiences that seem designed to keep us humble. Once I was invited to the White House by President George Bush. When Narvel, Shelby, and I were escorted into the President's chambers, we stood in awe. But Shelby, less than a year old, grabbed the President's finger and started slobbering on it. I apologized, but he told me not to worry about it. He was used to that from his grandchildren. Mrs. Bush was very welcoming and gracious, and even showed us where they lived and the rooms where other presidents had slept. I stood in one of the rooms that Jackie Kennedy had redecorated, and in the Lincoln room where Michael Jackson had stood at the window and waved to a fan. A girl who never had her own room as a child walked among the private chambers of the most powerful men in history. Still, meeting some of these famous folks hasn't impressed me as much as meeting some of my everyday fans. So many of them have followed my career from the very beginning, and I appreciate their loyalty tremendously. No one could be more loving than my fans. They put groceries on my table, and I hope I've brought half as much joy to their lives as they have brought to me. I thank the Lord daily for Shelby and for putting Narvel and me together so we could have him. Family unity is priceless, so I want Shelby to be with me a lot, and I often take him along on personal appearance tours. He and I might go swimming or just play during the day, and then I leave him with Michelle Nunn, his new nanny that replaced Cindy Bailey when she got married in 1993, while I do my show. Sometimes he goes to my after-show visit with members of my fan club. At my annual fan club party in June of 1993, Shelby came on stage with me. He looked the crowd right in the eye, and he talked to me and he talked to them. I know it thrilled him to be in front of an audience. He already has quite a bit of showbiz in him. In October of that same year, I was playing Las Vegas, and Shelby flew out with Cindy Bailey, who was then his nanny. On the second night, he asked if he could go to my show with me. "Shelby, you want to come out on the stage tonight and bring me a towel, because I sure do get sweaty." "Yeah, Mama, I do that," he said. So I told Graham Lagdon, my tour manager. Now, when I say I've been worried about how to introduce Shelby into the workplace, especially since this is the music business, send him out. So Shelby came out right on cue, carrying a towel. Instead of bringing me a rose or something, he was bringing me something that meant he was really working. The crowd just loved it. I played Phoenix the next night and asked Shelby if he'd like to repeat his performance. "No, Mom," he said, "I'm too tired of that. Let Guam do it." I have a million cute stories about him, just like any mother has. One has to do with Shelby's potty training and the honesty of a child. Shelby learned to use the bathroom by coming to me and saying, "Pee-pee, Mama, pee-pee." We'd run to the bathroom and Shelby'd do his business, and I'd say, "Good boy, Shelby, good boy." One day when we were on a vacation in 1992, Narvel, Shelby, and I were in the bathroom getting ready to go out to eat. Shelby still carries a security blanket and was carrying it inside the bathroom with Narvel and me. When Narvel stepped over to the toilet to use the restroom, Shelby walked over to him, took his blankie out of his mouth, and said, "Good boy, Day, good boy." That was one for the baby book. My son's childhood obviously won't have anything in common with my own. People ask me if I'm afraid Shelby will be spoiled, and I tell folks I know he's already spoiled. But so am I. Not many people live the way I grew up, and not many people live the way I do now. I've always believed that children need and want discipline. Shelby's nannies have always had permission to discipline him if they needed to. I expect him to behave himself and to have good manners, and he does. Narvel and I have made it a practice to teach Shelby to look grown-ups in the eye when he talks to them, and to call them ma'am and sir. He's only 4, but he's definitely old enough to say please and thank you. Some of my friends have been very complimentary of Shelby's behavior, and I appreciate their kind words. Another important source of my happiness is the fact that my parents have long since escaped the poverty that afflicted their lives when us kids were young. They bought a new place 4 years ago. There's a window in the living room, and you can see in 3 directions for miles. Everything visible belongs to them. Maybe it's getting older and settled in life that has helped me recognize these things, but in some ways, I'm sure, the tragedy of March 16, 1991, has helped bring it home to me how fragile life is. No matter what happens to you, if you can draw strength from God and the people you love, nothing can ever defeat you. I remember flying home alone for the first time on our new airplane in June of 1991, not long after the crash, to return to Nashville. Before I got on, I walked up to the plane, and I asked God to bless it. "Now, Kevin," I said to Kevin McCutcheon, my pilot, "let's agree right now in the name of Jesus that everybody who steps on this plane is protected, and that it will fly safely and swiftly." He agreed. In early November of 1992, Narvel, Sandy, and I boarded a flight to Madison, Wisconsin, where our opening act, Brooks and Dunn, was getting ready to go on stage. By then, I knew the sound of the plane's landing gear returning to place after takeoff. On that night, I suddenly realized I wasn't hearing what I was supposed to hear. "Something's wrong," I said to Narvel. "Yeah," he said. About that time, Kevin looked through the curtain and motioned to Narvel to come to the cockpit. When Narvel came back, he confirmed what we had feared. "The landing gear didn't go up," he said, "and it won't go down. It's jammed." Then Kevin's voice came over the intercom. "We're going to fly around for a while to burn off more fuel. That way, if we make an emergency landing, we won't have much fuel on board." We cruised for about 45 minutes. During that time, to get our minds off what could happen, Sandy and I played cards and talked. Meanwhile, Kevin was talking to the Nashville Tower and working constantly with the controls. Then he said, "We're going to make an emergency landing." On our first approach, I saw fire trucks on the side of the runway, waiting, just like in the movies. I hadn't been scared until then, but then I felt my eyes fill with tears. I honestly didn't panic, and I remember thinking, if it's my time, it's my time. And then we heard Kevin again. He said, "We're going to land on the 2 back wheels, slow down as much as possible, and then come down on the nose and belly of the plane. It's going to be loud, there will be metal against concrete, and we should have a few sparks." Now, the plane was probably going about 200 miles an hour when the weight of the fuselage settled onto the runway. Its scraping lasted for what seemed like an eternity, and it was definitely loud. Vice President-elect Al Gore was scheduled to arrive at the airport minutes after our forced landing, so the place was crawling with news cameramen who wound up filming us. The videotape made the plane look like a drag racing car with wings that were sweating fire. The instant the plane shrieked to a halt, Narvel, Sandy, and I jumped up from our seats. Once on the ground, we were surrounded by men wearing what looked like spacesuits and holding hoses. They sprayed the plane down with white foam. From the air, Kevin had ordered the preparation of another plane. We got right on it. People have asked me if I hesitated to board an airplane after getting off the one that had emergency landed. I didn't. "Well, if you have a car wreck, you get right into an ambulance," I told one interviewer. Our plane touched down in Madison, and we took the limousine to the back of the concert hall, as we had done 100 times before. And then I went out and did my show. And afterwards I did what I've done so many times before, and what I'll do indefinitely. I got back